In the summer of 1942, the Mediterranean shimmered like a blade, blue, deceptive, and deadly. Operation Harpoon was meant to break through the Axis blockade and save Malta from starvation. Convoys of oil tankers and freighters steamed through seas haunted by U-boats, Italian torpedo bombers, and Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes. Yet, amid the radio chatter and chaos of that fateful week, one vessel, the SS Greyhound, vanished without distress call or confirmed sinking. Its name was quietly struck from the Admiralty's logs, its manifest sealed in classified archives. What began as a supply run became one of the Royal Navy's most persistent ghosts, whispered among intelligence officers as the ship that never docked. Now, decades later, fragments of redacted intercepts and recovered sonar scans hint that the Greyhound carried far more than fuel or flour. It carried something the Allies were willing to bury under silence and the sea itself. Chapter 1. The Ghost Convoy of Operation Harpoon. The official record states that Operation Harpoon departed Gibraltar on June 12, 1942, under escort by elements of Force H, the light cruiser HMS Liverpool, destroyers Antelope, Ithuriel, and others, carrying vital supplies to the besieged island of Malta. In total, 6 merchant ships formed the convoy. 5 would eventually be accounted for, 3 sunk, 2 damaged and limping into port. The 6th, the SS Greyhound, is mentioned in only one Royal Navy communication log dated June 13th, then disappears entirely. No acknowledgement of her loss, no survivor reports, not even a German claim of sinking her. The line simply ends with the words, "Greyhound detached per directive, awaiting further orders." For decades, historians assumed clerical error, yet within a declassified memorandum found in 1998, filed under Naval Intelligence Division Cipher intercepts. Mediterranean Theatre, a single page references Convoy Delta 7 deviation, authorization code Spectre 1. The Greyhound was reassigned mid-transit, but by whose order? Admiral Sir Henry Harwood, commanding Force H, denied ever issuing it. The message's origin traces not to Gibraltar Command but to an MI6 relay station on the outskirts of Lisbon, a known hub for clandestine communications under wartime censorship. The date and cipher block match exactly with the day the Greyhound veered from the main formation. The ship's manifest, still classified under Section 23 of the UK Official Secrets Act, was said to contain restricted electromagnetic research materials. Among these were components for an experimental radar system, Project Lumen, jointly developed by the Telecommunications Research Establishment and Bletchley Park. While the technology itself was primitive, compared to post-war advances, it represented an early attempt to detect encrypted Enigma transmissions via atmospheric frequency shifts. Aboard the Greyhound were 3 civilian technicians from Malvern, travelling under assumed naval ranks. 1. Letiar A. Kemble has no corresponding entry in British personnel archives. The convoy's logbook, recovered from the wreck of the Liverpool in 1943, notes that the Greyhound's last known position was near latitude 36 degrees and longitude 12 degrees, approximately 200 nautical miles south of Sardinia. Subsequent ultra-intercepts suggest Luftwaffe reconnaissance spotted a British freighter under escort by unknown destroyer-type vessel in that sector. None of the Axis navies recorded engagement or confirmed sinking. In 1957, Italian fishermen trawling the same area recovered twisted aluminum fragments bearing partial Royal Navy serial numbers. When turned over to British authorities, the materials were confiscated under the Official Secrets Act. The fisherman's son, interviewed decades later, recalled that the fragments emitted a strange hum when moved, as though magnetized. He was told never to speak of it again. The CIA's Office of Naval Research later declassified a 1968 memo referencing a sonar anomaly in precisely that region. The USS Requin, an American submarine on NATO patrol, reported detecting metallic debris field resembling medium cargo vessel, approximate length 400 feet. The coordinates were redacted, but an analyst note reads, "No record of Allied losses here. Possible Harpoon residual." In 1982, a Freedom of Information request by journalist Colin Fraser turned up a startling entry in the Admiralty's restricted index. The file, coded ADM-INS 9427, was titled Greyhound Administrative Transfer. Within it lay a single carbon copy memo, dated July 14, 1942, marked Eyes Only, Commander NID. The memo's closing line reads, "Greyhound, delivered to U.S. Naval Liaison per standing agreement. Final disposition to be sealed under Section 5. There is no record of any such agreement existing at that time. Project. Lumen itself vanished from research ledgers after July 1942. Its budget line was absorbed into Atlantic Communications Security, an innocuous-sounding program later revealed to have links with early SIGINT cooperation between the US and Britain. In 1991, during the declassification of wartime Ultra archives, a retired technician named Gerald Howson came forward. He had been a Cipher clerk in Gibraltar during Harpoon and remembered hearing rumors of a special cargo ship diverted to deliver non-existent cargo to an American rendezvous off Sicily. According to Howson, one night in June, an encrypted transmission was received from a station using the call sign Spectre 1. It wasn't one of theirs. The message simply read, "Transfer completed. Return to silence." Cross-checking the call sign revealed something deeply unsettling. Spectre 1 was associated with a pre-war SIS shadow network that had been officially disbanded in 1939 after internal leaks compromised agents in Spain and Vichy France. Whoever used it in 1942 had either revived a dead network or never disbanded it at all. Researchers attempting to trace the Greyhound's registry found that her Lloyd's entry was amended in 1946 to list administrative reassignment to Allied operations, no further notes. It was as though she had been repurposed for something post-war, possibly under American command. A former ONI officer, interviewed anonymously in 1974, hinted that the Greyhound might have been incorporated into an unacknowledged fleet, tasked with intelligence transfers between European and North African theatres. When asked about her disappearance, he replied only, "Some ships don't sink. They vanish by order." Underwater mapping surveys in the early 2000s identified several unidentified wrecks south of Sardinia. One, labelled Object Delta, corresponds in dimension to a British Type C freighter. The wreck sits upright, largely intact, but with no identifying markings. Divers from an Italian maritime research team noted that all nameplates and hull numbers had been deliberately removed. Inside, the cargo holds were empty except for corroded mounting brackets, possibly once holding machinery. The bridge still contained fragments of bakelite radio panels, fused together by heat. What unsettled the divers most was what they found in the radio compartment, a lead-lined box sealed and half buried beneath debris. The box was recovered, then immediately confiscated by local authorities citing foreign jurisdiction. When pressed for details, the lead diver later stated that it bore an embossed mark, an outline of a greyhound's head inside a circle. He received an anonymous letter 3 months later, warning him to cease inquiries into naval matter, ADM INS 9427. Today, the official British Naval Archives maintain that no vessel named SS Greyhound was lost during Operation Harpoon. Yet, in the private holdings of the Imperial War Museum, a faded photograph labelled simply Convoy Delta 7, Gibraltar Departure, clearly shows 6 merchant ships, not 5, steaming out of harbour. The 6th, partially obscured by fog, bears on her bow the unmistakable name Greyhound. Some believe she was deliberately erased, her mission classified beyond visibility. Others suspect that the administrative transfer, referenced in secret memos, was a handover to early American intelligence, perhaps a joint experiment in real-time signal detection using radar harmonics, a technology that would later evolve into electronic surveillance. But a smaller group, among them former intelligence historians, hold to a darker theory, that the Greyhound's cargo wasn't scientific equipment at all, but captured Axis communication prototypes intended for covert testing, and that whatever they found, or unleashed, was never meant to resurface. What remains certain is this: somewhere beneath the calm Mediterranean lies the hull of a ship erased from every ledger, carrying secrets that both nations swore never to acknowledge. And if the encrypted phrase, "return to silence," truly marked her end, then the sea may have obeyed that order longer than any man. Chapter 2. The Lisbon Transmission. By the time the Greyhound detached from Convoy Delta 7, midnight had already swallowed the Mediterranean horizon. Her log entries for June 14, 1942, cease abruptly at 23:47 hours. From that point onward, all information comes from intercepts, not witnesses. What remains is a paper trail of silence, radio bursts, misfiled messages, and one peculiar transmission from a neutral shore. On June 15th, the British Embassy in Lisbon logged an unannounced visit from Commander Edwin Carrow, attached to SIS liaison duty. The record, stamped with the Foreign Office crest, lists his meeting simply as Special Operations, Maritime Transfer. Later testimony by Carrow's secretary described him as agitated, repeating the phrase Spectre 1 under his breath. His personal notebook, recovered after his death in 1956, contains a single line under that same date: Greyhound secured, Lumen now American jurisdiction. It is in Lisbon that the chain of accountability breaks. The city was a wartime crossroads, a haven for spies, informants, and defectors from both sides. Dozens of British and American fronts operated there under false names: shipping firms, insurance brokers, radio repair shops, all facades masking the secret war over technology and intelligence. Among them was a warehouse on Rua do Arsenal, registered as Lusitania Maritime Co. Yet archival invoices show it was receiving encrypted telexes from Gibraltar labelled D7 Spectre Cargo. No explanation follows, only a final line typed in red ink: hold until transfer complete. For decades, the idea of an Anglo-American rift over experimental radar seemed implausible. Yet Project Lumen's design papers, discovered in fragments at Bletchley Park, suggest that the system was not merely radar, it was a form of passive detection, capable of reading enemy encryption signals through subtle distortions in the atmosphere. Such a capability, if it existed, would have rendered Enigma decryption redundant. For the Americans, whose naval code-breaking efforts lagged behind Ultra, Lumen represented a leap into a new domain: electronic intelligence born decades before the Cold War formalized it. A telegram from the US Office of Naval Intelligence to London, dated July 2, 1942, reads coldly: appreciate British cooperation in electromagnetic trials Mediterranean. Further collaboration unnecessary at this time. No British reply survives. Historians later noted that MI6 head Stuart Menzies ordered all records related to experimental transceivers purged from operational summaries that same week. The last known sighting of the Greyhound came from a Spanish fishing vessel off Alboran Island. Its captain, Raúl Menendez, gave a statement to the Guardia Civil in 1948 when questioned by Allied investigators. He described a grey merchant ship travelling without escort, lights off, flying neither flag nor identification. He claimed it was shadowed by a smaller ship, maybe a destroyer, with no hull markings. When asked how close he got, Menendez replied, "Close enough to hear English voices on the wind." The following morning, Allied coastal monitors at Gibraltar logged a faint radio ping matching British merchant frequencies. The signal originated approximately 140 miles east of Malta. Its message, once decrypted, consisted of 6 meaningless words: Spectre 1 secure, awaiting extraction coordinates. Then silence. No Allied or Axis ship reported being in that area. The message header identified the transmitter as Greyhound, but the encryption key, X9R, belonged to a US Navy Cipher machine, not British. When the war ended, the Joint Intelligence Review Committee examined dozens of such orphan transmissions. Most were dismissed as interference or errors, but buried among them was a 12-page technical report authored by Lieutenant Commander Robert H. Sloan, U.S. Navy Signal Intelligence. The report, stamped confidential, describes anomalous signal propagation. Recorded from source designated G-Hound, Sloan hypothesized that the frequency patterns exhibited resonant backscatter consistent with intentional manipulation. He concluded, this signal behaved as if reflected by its own transmitter. In plain terms, the Greyhound was transmitting, but also receiving something not of external origin. 3 months later, Sloan was reassigned to Project Shamrock, the earliest NSA precursor dedicated to intercepting civilian cables. His report disappeared from ONI files. In 1963, an internal MI5 briefing, codenamed Operation Tideglass, revisited the case while investigating a Soviet claim that the British had experimented with self-contained radar encryption nodes during the war. The Tideglass team retrieved one Lumen prototype from storage, still operational. It emitted low-frequency pulses even when disconnected from power. The reading was faint but measurable, barely above ambient radio noise, pulsing once every 12 seconds. Scientists called it a resonance ghost. The file was reclassified within the week. Meanwhile, Portuguese naval archives preserve an unassuming entry dated June 20th, 1942. Coastal defense batteries near Peniche reported unidentified naval activity offshore. Through binoculars, observers noted flashes resembling coded light signals exchanged between two ships, one grey, one dark. The exchange lasted 47 minutes before both disappeared into fog. The commander filed his report with Lisbon's Ministry of Defence. 2 days later, British diplomats visited to clarify misunderstandings regarding maritime observation. One curious footnote in the Lisbon embassy's records remains: a receipt for 200 litres of aviation fuel issued to a Captain A. Merrick, US Army Air Corps. No such officer appears in American rosters, but a diary entry from the embassy driver references night delivery to Arsenal docks. In the margin, one line reads, "Strange cargo, sealed crates labelled Lumen A3. From that point, the trail vanishes into Cold War bureaucracy. Portugal's neutrality, its strategic location, and its espionage density made it the perfect environment for plausible deniability. When the Allies prepared to invade North Africa later that year, logistical confusion provided cover for nearly any operation. Administrative transfer, the Admiralty memo called it, the perfect euphemism for disappearance. Half a century later, a researcher named Fiona Sykes uncovered fragments of magnetic tape from an abandoned SIS storage facility outside Cheltenham. The reels, degraded and mislabeled, contained incomplete recordings of wartime communications. Among static and bursts of Morse was a faint English voice saying, "Greyhound to Spectre, transmission holding, awaiting further instruction." The tone was calm, procedural. Then a second voice responded, American accent unmistakable. "Spectre to Greyhound, initiate silence protocol, confirm." The recording cuts there. To the intelligence community, the tape was an oddity. To Sykes, it was proof. She wrote in her notes, "They didn't lose the ship, they absorbed it." But what neither she nor later investigators could explain was the final 3 seconds of the reel, a low harmonic vibration barely audible but measurable on spectrum analysis, a frequency not matching any known transmitter of the era. When compared with surviving data from Project Lumen, it matched perfectly, and so the Greyhound's course ends not with a sinking, but with a transfer, an invisible handover from British secrecy to American containment, concealed behind the veil of wartime necessity. Whether her crew survived, whether her cargo functioned as intended, remains unknown. The Lisbon transmission, preserved in fragments, offers the last known proof of life. Everything beyond it belongs to shadows. Chapter 3. The Malta Silence. By mid-July 1942, Malta's harbours were barely functional. Axis bombers had reduced Valletta's Grand Harbour to rubble, and supply convoys rarely survived the journey. For those on the island, Operation Harpoon was supposed to be salvation. Food was rationed to ounces, ammunition to single shells. Yet even in desperation, whispers travelled faster than ration trucks. The missing ship, the Greyhound, was not forgotten. Within weeks, rumours among dockyard workers and RAF personnel began to surface, claiming a ghost freighter had been spotted beyond the three cities' shoreline, signals flashing briefly before vanishing into cloud and static. Officially, the Royal Navy dismissed the stories, but within the command bunker beneath Lascaris, a report dated July 9th records unknown frequency bursts, consistent with Allied radar prototype transmission. The note was signed by Lieutenant Peter Hollingsworth, telecommunications officer, who later died in a Luftwaffe airstrike. His surviving files, preserved in a faded manila folder marked Malta SIGINT Anomaly, describe receiving 3 bursts spaced precisely 12 minutes apart. Each was identical in structure, encoded in a rhythm of short, low-frequency pulses, similar to Lumen test protocols conducted months earlier in Dorset. The origin of the pulses could not be triangulated. British intercept stations at Tarkali and Dingley Cliffs each registered them from opposite bearings, one pointing north towards Sicily, the other east toward open sea. The intersection point fell over deep water, precisely where the Greyhound's escort reported losing sight of her. Hollingsworth's final note reads, "Signal behaves as though reflected, not transmitted, may originate below surface." When word of the anomaly reached Bletchley Park, a Cipher conference convened under emergency directive. Among the attendees was Alan Turing, whose personal logbook records an entry on July 17, 1942. Field transmission, Malta anomaly. Spectral duplication suggests harmonic feedback, not enemy code. Recommends cessation of intercept. The entry was circled in red pencil by his superior. For reasons never explained, the topic was never revisited. For those stationed in Malta, unexplained radio behavior was common. Atmospheric interference, sunspot distortion, and electronic sabotage were everyday hazards. Yet the intensity of the Malta anomaly unsettled even hardened signalmen. The pulse seemed to respond to human presence. Operators swore that whenever the receiver was tuned slightly higher, the static shifted into something rhythmic, almost like breath. 2 weeks later, HMS Welshman, a fast mine layer running the Gauntlet route, reported a contact near the same coordinates. Sonar registered a faint metallic echo beneath 1,200 feet, then nothing. The contact was logged and ignored. The war had more urgent concerns, but the silence persisted. Throughout August and September, local radio stations occasionally experienced unexplained interference, steady hums at night that faded before dawn. The Maltese Broadcasting Authority filed technical complaints, believing German jamming was to blame. Engineers later determined the frequencies matched the Lumen prototype range precisely, 8.7 to 9.1 megacycles. In 1944, after the Axis siege lifted, the Royal Navy conducted a routine hydrographic survey around Malta. Survey vessel HMS Challenger recorded an acoustic irregularity in deep water southeast of the island. The sonar operator noted a reflection signature consistent with metallic hull fragment. The object was filed as wreck, unidentified, likely merchant class. Then, for reasons unknown, the entry was blacked out in subsequent reports. When researchers revisited Challenger's logbooks decades later, they discovered the blacked-out section concealed a brief annotation. Unidentified radio signal concurrent with sonar contact. Possible automatic distress beacon. Duration 00.17. The annotation's handwriting matches that of Commander Lionel Stratton, Royal Navy hydrographer, who was reassigned to intelligence duties immediately after the mission. It would be almost 30 years before the anomaly surfaced again. In 1973, during NATO's Ocean Venture exercises, an American sonar team picked up irregular echoes east of Malta. The signal was faint but consistent, a repeating tone at 12-minute intervals. When plotted against 1942 data, the coordinates aligned almost perfectly with Hollingsworth's intercept zone. The tone persisted for 4 hours before ceasing abruptly. Analysts labeled it probable equipment malfunction. But in 1980, an internal report circulated among the US Naval Research Laboratory bore the title Project Lumen Residual Field Analysis. The opening paragraph referenced recurrent low-frequency harmonics identified near Malta, consistent with self-sustaining resonance source established circa 1942. In simpler terms, something in the deep water was still transmitting. The report drew on data from passive hydrophones deployed during Cold War surveillance operations. The devices, intended to monitor Soviet submarines, had recorded multiple unexplained frequency spikes. Each spike contained binary-like patterns resembling British Cipher formatting from the 1940s. When analysts attempted to decode them, the output produced fragments of English text, partial words such as secure, awaiting, signal, and one repeating term, spectre. The findings were quickly buried. The scientists were reassigned, the equipment recalibrated, and the project dissolved. Official explanations cited hydroacoustic resonance from geological formations, but among intelligence circles, whispers began circulating of a talking wreck beneath the Mediterranean, a derelict that refused to die quietly. In 1995, oceanographer Dr. Andrew Wilcox, working under civilian grant, attempted to remap the area using side-scan sonar. His expedition logs, later seized by Ministry of Defense agents, described detecting an artificial structure at 36 degrees 12 degrees, matching the last known position of the Greyhound. Wilcox noted anomalous electromagnetic disturbance affecting compasses and navigation systems when approaching the site. One of his divers reported hearing faint metallic knocks echoing through the hull of their submersible. Wilcox dismissed it as pressure-related acoustics until his hydrophone recorded a brief pulse, a pattern identical to Hollingsworth's wartime intercepts. The dive ended abruptly after equipment failure. Upon resurfacing, the team found their recording drives wiped. Wilcox never conducted another expedition. In an interview years later, he said only, "It's still active down there, still waiting for a reply." Today, Malta's archives retain a handful of surviving documents under seal. The Hollingsworth file, Challenger's sonar sheets, and a memo from 1980 linking Spectre 1 transmissions to NATO acoustic incidents. Together, they form the skeleton of a story that both governments refuse to acknowledge. If the Greyhound did sink, it did not rest quietly. Its presence echoes, literally, in frequencies no one dares to investigate. And if Project Lumen was indeed an experiment in harmonic interception, then perhaps it succeeded too well. The sea remembers. It records. And beneath Malta's calm waters, something built for listening may have never stopped. Chapter 4. The Admiralty Cover File. For 20 years after the end of the war, the SS Greyhound remained a rumour spoken only in classified corridors. Not a single mention appeared in official war summaries, not even among the exhaustive post-war accounting of merchant marine losses. That omission was deliberate. The first solid trace of the cover-up appeared in 1962, when a junior archivist named Margaret Kane stumbled upon a file mislabeled Maritime Insurance 1942 Claims. Inside, she found carbon copies of correspondence stamped with the Admiralty crest and marked Eyes Only, Director NID. The subject line read, Greyhound Administrative Transfer, File ADM INS 9427. The discovery should have been bureaucratic trivia. Instead, it ignited one of the most persistent intelligence mysteries of the post-war era. Kane later recalled that the file contained photographs of a convoy at Gibraltar, letters from the Ministry of Supply referencing sealed cargo containers, and a memorandum signed by Admiral Harwood himself, authorizing temporary cooperation with American naval liaison, per Directive Spectre. 2 weeks after she logged the file into the General Index, naval security officers visited the archive, confiscated the folder, and instructed staff never to discuss it again. Kane was transferred to a non-classified department within a month. She left no copy, but she wrote down a single reference line before surrendering it. See also Lumen, Liaison, Lisbon Channel Intercept. When researchers petitioned for access in the 1970s, the Admiralty denied the file's existence. Yet in 1978, during a National Archives audit, a duplicate registry card surfaced under cross-reference. ADM INS 9427, destroyed 1947 per Security Directive. The signature authorizing destruction belonged to a Captain Donald Reeves, who by then had retired to a quiet life in Kent. Reeves was interviewed in 1980 by investigative historian Ian Radcliffe. In a recorded session, Reeves admitted, "I don't recall destroying anything. I remember being told to sign that notice. The papers weren't burned. They were boxed." When asked who gave the order, he hesitated, then said, "Someone from Washington, not the embassy, something higher." Meanwhile, the US National Archives contain a corresponding absence. Between 1942 and 1943, a gap appears in the ONI's merchant vessel intelligence records, one serial missing from the sequential log. Analysts who later examined the numbering pattern concluded the omission wasn't random. The missing serial, when reconstructed, would have aligned with British convoy operations during Operation Harpoon. The blank space in the ledger stands like a scar, hinting at what was once there. In 1983, a retired MI6 cryptographer named Douglas Fairburn quietly published a private memoir. In it, he describes an unnamed Mediterranean incident involving an experimental transmission device recovered by US forces under questionable authorization. He claimed the British were pressured to relinquish the prototype after the convoy's loss, and that an internal investigation concluded no further inquiry warranted, subject now under joint oversight. Fairburn's book was pulped weeks after release, but copies circulated within intelligence circles. Page 212 contains a line heavily debated ever since. The Greyhound message was not a signal, it was a signature. It was around that same period that the Admiralty began digitizing its archives. Contractors tasked with scanning microfilm reels noted several sequences of missing frames. Among them, a portion labeled Naval Intelligence Division, Mediterranean 1942. Frame numbers 1112 through 1129 were blank. When processed under infrared analysis, faint outlines of typed text appeared. The legible words, Spectre, received, unacknowledged, transmission sustained, below them, a notation in pencil, contact deferred, containment priority. Whatever was once printed, there was deliberately overexposed before copying. By the early 2000s, journalists attempting to trace Project Lumen's funding met a wall of redactions. A Freedom of Information appeal revealed that at least 3 separate agencies, MI6, GCHQ, and the US Naval Intelligence Command, had jointly agreed to extend secrecy on files relating to electromagnetic communication, anomalies during Peenemünde. Each cited potential ongoing defense relevance. The only document partially released was a 1946 memorandum from the newly formed CIA referencing the Greyhound transmission protocol as an early precursor to passive atmospheric signal mapping. In the margin, someone had written by hand, further deployment suspended, residual interference observed. It is this phrase, residual interference, that appears again decades later in a classified NATO study on electromagnetic persistence in maritime zones, suggesting that whatever the Greyhound carried continued to produce measurable phenomena long after the war. Scientists examining sonar and radio anomalies in the Mediterranean found recurring spikes matching Lumen's harmonic frequencies. The implication was unnerving. The lost equipment, possibly still active on the seabed, was transmitting without power supply or human input. To contain rumours, the Admiralty began issuing quiet denials. In internal correspondence dated 2004, an anonymous official summarised their position. The vessel in question did not exist. The incident described in archival materials relates to a coding misattribution. But not all departments agreed. Within the Defence Intelligence Staff, a subcommittee labelled Section Blue re-examined declassified sonar logs from NATO's Operation Active Endeavour. The results, now public, confirm that unidentified signals consistent with synthetic lumen profiles were indeed recorded. The report concludes, unknown artificial origin, no known Allied or Soviet equivalent. Perhaps the most haunting revelation came in 2011, when a private researcher gained limited access to a mislabeled batch of microfilm at Q. Frame 337 of the reel displayed a blurred photograph of a cargo ship's bow, half submerged, taken from an aircraft. The caption beneath it read, Unidentified Vessel, Central Mede, June 1942. Zoom enhancement revealed the faint outline of painted letters, G, WH, ND. The image was pulled from the system within hours of discovery. When confronted by journalists years later, a senior Ministry of Defense spokesperson offered the same answer, repeated since the war's end. There was no vessel by that name participating in Operation Harpoon. All relevant losses are accounted for. And yet, the internal classification label, Greyhound Administrative Transfer, remains active in the National Archives Digital Index, its metadata updated as recently as 2023. What began as a wartime mystery hardened into bureaucratic doctrine. The Admiralty cover file ensured that the Greyhound's existence was not denied outright, but displaced into paperwork, converted from material truth into administrative fiction. It was easier to lose a ship on paper than to admit it had never been recovered. Somewhere in a sealed vault, perhaps beneath Northwood, perhaps in an American annex, sits the original ADM-INS 9427. Its contents likely mundane, memos, charts, telex transcripts, requisition orders. Yet among them, perhaps, lies a line explaining why a single freighter carrying experimental radar was erased from history. Until that file surfaces, the official story stands. The Greyhound never sailed, the operation succeeded as planned, and the silence that followed was coincidence. But if silence were truly innocent, it would not need to be protected for 80 years. Chapter 5, The Recovery Mission. In 2017, a small consortium of maritime researchers calling itself the Orpheus Project announced an expedition to document uncharted WWII wrecks in the central Mediterranean. Officially, it was a collaboration between the University of Southampton and Italy's Istituto di Oceanografia. Privately, several of its funding sources traced to defense research grants issued through NATO's Centre for Maritime Intelligence. Their stated goal: locate and identify a medium-class British freighter, approximate loss 1942, coordinates 36 degrees 12 degrees E. They avoided naming it. But among intelligence historians, the target was obvious. The Greyhound, the team's survey vessel, RV Pelagia, deployed in late May 2018. Using multi-beam sonar, they scanned a 40-square-kilometre grid southeast of Malta, focusing on a trench known locally as the Pantelleria Corridor. On the fifth day, sonar registered a distinct return, a symmetrical hull approximately 120 metres long, upright, resting on the seabed at 4,200 metres. The ship was intact, her bow facing east. Her shape and dimensions matched British merchant blueprints from 1941. Excitement turned to unease when the sonar feed flickered, as though interference were emanating from the wreck itself. The onboard technician, accustomed to such anomalies, rebooted the array, only to watch the interference synchronize into a steady pulse every 12 minutes. The same pattern found in the Hollingsworth files from Malta. Video reconnaissance commenced the next morning. The Pelagia's remotely operated vehicle descended into darkness, its cameras slicing through layers of suspended silt. At 4,100 meters, the wreck emerged, grey steel, corrosion streaking its hull, bridge partially collapsed. Yet amid decay, one feature stood out. Along the bow, almost free of marine growth, was a circular emblem, a stylized greyhound's head, embossed in relief. No registry number, no visible name. The sea had preserved the mark. Inside the forward hold, the ROV found a row of bolted crates. Many had split open from pressure, revealing coiled cables, glass tubes, and rusted instruments resembling oscillators. Near the stern, a sealed compartment remained intact, its door reinforced with lead sheeting. Radiation meters began to register faint but consistent readings, not dangerous, but distinct, similar to those emitted by old radar cathode tubes. The operator, cautious, rotated the camera to inspect the door. Stenciled faintly in white letters, Lumen A3, property of NID. The feed abruptly cut to static. For 10 full minutes, technicians struggled to re-establish control. When the image returned, the ROV's navigation sensors were spinning, as though magnetically scrambled. A low hum filled the audio channel, a vibration too regular to be mechanical. On spectral analysis, the frequency registered at precisely 9.04 megacycles. Contact was terminated. The Pelagia's team surfaced, documenting all data before sealing it under NATO confidentiality. Within a week, the Italian Maritime Authority issued a no-dive order for the coordinates, citing environmental hazard. The expedition leader, Dr. Elisa Warren, gave a single press statement before withdrawing from public view. Her words were careful, almost rehearsed. We identified a vessel consistent with wartime loss records. For safety reasons, no recovery operations will proceed. She refused to take questions. 3 months later, a classified communiqué circulated among British defence circles under the heading Subject Orpheus Incident. It summarised the expedition's findings but focused on one unexplained detail, the post-dive telemetry log. The Pelagia's instruments had continued to record faint transmissions from the wreck, long after ROV power loss. The signals repeated the same sequence every 12 minutes, matching those logged in 1942, 1973, and 1980. Analysts recognized fragments resembling British naval code formatting. The recovered data included partial plaintext strings, Spectre 1, secured, and protocol active. The message ended with an alphanumeric block repeated 3 times, G9427, the same code as the missing Admiralty file. That night, the telemetry archive at Southampton was seized under directive from the Ministry of Defence. Witnesses recall unmarked vehicles, sealed containers, and officials who spoke little. Within days, the university received compensation for equipment loss during international research. The Orpheus project was dissolved quietly, its online traces scrubbed. Unverified sources claim that a second, clandestine dive occurred 6 months later, conducted by a US Navy vessel under NATO flag. The mission, codenamed Nereid, reportedly deployed a deep submergence vehicle to retrieve sensitive materials from the wreck. No official record of the operation exists, but flight trackers from Malta documented unusual military transport traffic in late December 2018. When questioned, the Pentagon released a brief statement. Routine oceanographic survey. Within a year, a new entry appeared in NATO's internal asset registry. Item G9427, Containment Facility, Norfolk. No description attached. Rumors persist that samples recovered from the wreck exhibited unusual electromagnetic persistence, continuing to emit low-level radio pulses even when sealed in storage. One technician allegedly described the effect as a heartbeat in metal. Whatever they recovered, it was not inert. Meanwhile, independent researchers attempting to verify the site found their access restricted. The area is now listed on maritime charts as a NATO hydroacoustic research zone, patrolled intermittently by naval vessels. Local fishermen claim their radios crackle with interference when crossing the boundary, pulses 12 minutes apart. If the Greyhound truly lies there, it has not surrendered its secrets. The equipment aboard, whether Project Lumen or something darker, appears to function long beyond any rational lifespan. It emits without fuel, without power, as if drawing energy from the very sea that entombed it. One final piece of evidence surfaced in 2020, an internal Admiralty email leak referencing Spectre frequencies reactivating in the Central Med. The context remains unknown, but at the bottom of the chain, a modern analyst appended a short, chilling note: recommend resuming containment per 1942 Directive. No nation officially acknowledges the existence of Directive Spectre, yet the sea still listens, and the air above Malta still hums faintly at 9 megacycles, an echo of a vanished ship that refuses to be silent. Some mysteries close with time, others continue transmitting, endlessly repeating their last order: return to silence. When the Pelagia returned to port, officials congratulated its crew in clipped voices, then ordered them never to speak of what they had seen. Reports were sealed, data encrypted, and sonar archives purged within days. Yet the unanswered questions remained. Who issued Directive Spectre? Why did both the British and Americans devote 80 years to protecting a ship that, by all accounts, should not exist? And if Project Lumen's technology still pulses beneath 4,000 meters of salt water, what exactly is it transmitting to? The Mediterranean remains quiet now, too quiet. Somewhere below, among rust and darkness, the Greyhound hums at 9 megacycles, awaiting a reply from a command long dissolved. Perhaps it is not just a transmission, but a reminder that silence, once ordered, never truly ends.